want to learn what you're thinking. It's such an incredibly big changes since last time we talked.
For the worse.
Would have been, yes, by far. This was not something you could have foreseen at that time, or
Not
a couple
on
months
the
ago?
Lebanese crisis, no.
Well, I'm going to try and understand it because it's a real mess. And I'm really pleased you could come in. It's good, very good to see you again. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to you in the audience, and it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Dr. Ervand Abrahamian. Right, Abrahamian. He's the distinguished professor of, I would say, Middle Eastern history at Baruch College of the CUNY, and he understands well the situation in that part of the world, which probably many of us in the United States or New York are curious about. And he's here to help enlighten us, and welcome once again very much to the program, Ervand Abrahamian.
Thank you.
My great good pleasure. Maybe you could introduce just in a brief kind of way your background, and then we want to get into a discussion of your take on the situation that is so before all the world now on, you know, August 2nd of the year 2006 with the events in Lebanon and so forth. Could you share your own background a little
Certainly.
bit, please?
I'm originally from the Middle East, but I basically studied the Middle East in England and United States, and I consider myself a historian of the Middle East, but the Middle East, like everywhere else, is very complex, so I don't claim to know everything about the Middle East or unravel all
stop the tape.
secrets.
He doesn't know everything, so you know, I understand.
So
yeah.
it's your introduction, I think, filled me as someone who knew, you know, I could answer the questions about the Middle East crisis. I don't think anyone can, because it is a very complex problem.
You know a lot more than most of us do.
Well, so I spent a lot of time, but
Yeah.
there's still more to learn.
Right, of course. That's the beginning of wisdom, I begin. But you studied did you study in England, you said, and also in the United States?
That's right, yeah.
And also in Tehran. You were born, you're Armenian, am I correct?
I'm Armenian. I was born in Tehran.
And you came away from Tehran when you were how old?
I was 10, yes.
10,
I left when
I
I was
see.
10.
And do you get back from time to time?
I used to go back, yes, and hopefully I will go back pretty soon.
And you have an understanding of Iran?
That's my main specialty, yes.
Okay.
I write on Iran, but I teach and study other parts of the Middle East.
I see. Well, then maybe I could just ask you, and we've done a program with you 2 or 3 months ago, which was very good, and thank you very much. What's your take on what's going on now?
Well, the situation has obviously got much worse in the last few weeks, and it can even get worse from what it is now. What I think is, for me, very worrying is we've had a lot of Middle East crises before during the Cold War, but paradoxically during the Cold War, because the superpowers were involved and the two superpowers were at loggerheads, they actually intervened at crucial points to cool down the crisis in the Middle East, because they realized the Middle East crisis could escalate and bring in the superpowers against each other in a nuclear holocaust. And that acted as a way of restraining the Middle East crisis from getting out of control. With the Cold War not there, you don't have this external pressure to come in.
It's all one-sided now.
It's one-sided, but the problem is the local problems in the Middle East have got worse. And right now there are really 4 separate Middle East crises. There is the core one, which I would call the Palestinian-Israeli crisis. Then there is the Lebanese crisis we're seeing now. Then there is the Iraqi crisis, the U.S. occupation of Iraq.
Awful.
And then there's added to that is another crisis, which is the Iranian nuclear program.
Right.
So all these 4 are almost all on automatic collision course. And that's why I think people who study the Middle East are very concerned what's going to happen a few weeks from down the line, because it could get even worse than it is now.
could get even worse. We did a program 3 months or so ago, and I don't know if I asked you on camera or not, but whether you could have predicted what happened or has happened in Lebanon or in Gaza from then to then. Do you think there was that there was a thing in place that was ready to have a chance to take advantage of? Was it anticipated that this sort of thing would happen? The thing over a couple of soldiers or something like that, or were you surprised?
I was surprised, but looking back now, I think it's part of a larger Israeli strategy. So one should have been able to predict it. Often the saying is that Israeli reaction is basically overdoing it, because after all, a few soldiers were kidnapped. That doesn't justify a massive aerial attack on Lebanon, displacement of about almost 1 million people, deaths of about 800 civilians. So if you put it that way,
infrastructure,
it doesn't justify it just if it's a question of a few soldiers. But I think what's more underlying it is Israeli strategy that sooner or later there is going to be either an American or an Israeli collision with Iran over the nuclear issue. So either U.S. or Israel is going to try and bomb the nuclear installations.
Do you think that's in the cards for the short term?
Yeah.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, in the next few months.
In the next few months?
Yeah.
The way Israel bombed the nuclear reactor in Iraq in 1981?
Similar, but I think this is bigger, so it would need probably American help too.
That's very, very disquieting.
Yeah, that's why I think that's really a collision, automatic pilot collision course, because the two sides, both U.S., Israel on one side, and Iran on the other side, their positions are really to the point that no compromise can be set. And if Iran basically pursues enrichment, U.S. and Israel will probably carry out air attacks. And the Israeli thinking, therefore, would be that if that happens, what Iran would do first would be tell Hezbollah to carry out missile attacks on Israel.
Well, they've been doing that.
Well, but the fear was with this along the line that would happen. Now, if Israel preempts that, attacks
with their
Hezbollah,
incursion?
Yes.
You think they have the capability to do that?
Well, they're trying to do it as much as they can.
Yeah, sure.
They want to destroy as much of the missiles as possible, as a guarantee that in future, when the attack on Iran occurs, Iran won't have the capability to attack Israel from Lebanon. So I think that's why.
You got to think. You got Iran, then you got Hezbollah, you got Lebanon attacking Israel. So is that Iran attacking Israel with those Katyusha rockets? Is that something that you seem to equate or conflate?
Well, the Israeli thinking is that Hezbollah is actually a tool of Iran. I don't think that's true.
You do not think it's true?
No, definitely not. Hezbollah is very much more independent. Its leaders don't take orders from anyone.
They're getting support from somewhere, aren't they?
Yeah, but you see, U.S. gives a lot of Israel support. But
I
that
would
doesn't,
say.
Yes, but
I
that
would
doesn't
say.
mean it takes orders.
Nobody says let's have a disarming of the Israeli forces. And why is that they don't? Some people must think that, or there are some questions being raised in some international circles that Israel's superpower, and there ought to be some questioning of their assumed role of historical legitimacy in that part of the world.
But I think just because any group gets support from somewhere else doesn't mean they're actually obeying their orders. And Hezbollah is very much an independent organization.
It is independent of Iran, you say?
Yeah. It really has its
What about some people, the connection as far as Syria?
It has connections with Syria. It has connections with a lot of people.
And I saw some people saying with the bombing that they're now, because you got a number of people that are Lebanese, that the number of people who support Hezbollah, some people would have said, don't be attacking Israel with rockets or doing anything of that sort of thing. But now, virtually the vast majority of people in Lebanon, 80% I saw, think that they are in support of Hezbollah against Israel, even in the more extreme notions that are put forth by Hezbollah about questioning the legitimacy of the state right from the get-go.
Yes, I mean, I think once Israel attacked massively on Lebanon, public opinion there in Lebanon shifted very much in favor of Hezbollah, because now Hezbollah attacks on Israel is seen as counterattacks, and the preemption is seen as coming from basically the first attack coming from Israel.
And the problem, and it's not only in Lebanon, I would say, in a good deal of the Muslim or the Arab and maybe the Muslim world, and a good deal of the world who questions the supposed hyperpower ability of the United States of America and their ally Israel. That's being questioned by greater numbers of people, so that the more they kill, the more they do that, the more an anti-Israeli/American attitude there will be manifest in the world. And American stature in the world is at an all-time low and going south.
Yeah, but there's two things to add. One is the American and Israeli basically image in the rest of the world has been so low for a long time that it can't go any further down.
You don't think so?
No. What happens is it intensifies among those who are anti-American, anti-Israeli. And that intensification has repercussions down the road.
Okay.
So the chickens will come to roost much later in a few years' time.
Okay.
But I don't think politicians usually worry about down the road. They're more concerned about the near future.
Yeah.
But there's another issue. I think both the administration in Washington and Tel Aviv, their motto actually is let them hate as long as they fear.
Right.
That is actually a quote which is often used by the theoreticians in both countries. One, of course, is Bernard Lewis. He is supposed to be the intellectual theoretician of the neoconservatives. He constantly says, let them hate as long as they fear.
Right.
It's actually a quote from Caligula.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It sounds like Caligula. I was actually going to say that.
But they don't cite Caligula because Caligula has had pretty bad press in
history. He's got a bad press in the
so,
last couple thousand years.
But that, I think, is very much drives the concern. So we often could say, well, this is bad for American image or Israeli image. Shouldn't that act as a restraint? But these administrations don't care about that. They look at basically on hard reality. They say, we have the ability to clout them.
Right.
If we clout them hard, they come to their senses. And it used to be the phrase, break bones. If you break bones in
Barack,
the
wasn't it?
And one can say it doesn't work.
Or was it Barack or not?
Yeah, it was actually Perez too.
All right,
So it actually, the more force is used, that usually the intensity on the other side increases. It radicalizes the other side. Right now you can see that Hezbollah is actually getting more support.
Absolutely.
It's probably getting more recruits. Hamas is strengthening itself. In Iran, it's probably pushing people more to the right towards support of more intransigent position.
Right.
And another problem which I think they don't take into account is hitting hard takes the premise the other side has no ability to hit hard too.
That's beginning to be questioned, I think, increasingly with the... I can remember, if I may, when Mr. Arafat was held up in Ramallah and there was some sort of a thing, and they rolled, I think there were, I looked it up, something like 14,000 tanks Israel has within their armored vehicles, and they rolled down, I think there were 4,000 tanks rolling down into Ramallah, and they stuck the tank right in his building and knocked out everything, and they had complete and utter control in the West Bank, over complete military control, and a couple of people had a stone they could hold up from the ground or something. There was no resistance able to be manifest by the people in the West Bank when Israel decided to wade into the West Bank on an incursion of a suicide bombing or something. There was no ability for them to lob rockets into Haifa. Now the Hezbollah is lobbing rockets, and thousands of them, into Haifa, and there is a resistance that there is a cost, and there's an actual resistance which could question the supposed invincibility of that model that Israel has wanted to project on that part of the world, and with the big brother United States behind them. And that's maybe being questioned now, do you think? I don't know.
It's also, I mean...
Much to the destruction of Lebanon and the Palestinian people, which has been constant for a long time.
I mean, it's a question of short-term interest versus long-term. The Israeli short-term interest was to destroy Arafat, the PLO, which they could do, and they did that, but they didn't think what will replace them.
Hamas was voted in.
Yeah.
It was voted in, and I think they've taken exception to a democratic election. It's too bad the people that are supposed to win the democratic election won, and they may be trying to disqualify the whole electoral process by the Palestinian people in order to reassert their power over, they used to say derogatorily, colonial powers to keep the wogs in order, as a term, you know,
keep the natives in control.
Keep the natives in control. In the case of the Arabs, I think often, or the Middle East, they called them wogs. They called them gooks, you know, that kind of thing. I'm sorry, I'm just saying that is a traditional colonial attitude of the Tommies in India would send them in with the Gatling gun and keep them under control. And they're going to assert that kind of a control because they're a superpower. But it's being questioned now, perhaps, by the ability of Hezbollah and the support for Hezbollah to actually counter that. And this war can't go, this bombing can't go on forever. And can they destroy the spirit, as it were, of or the influence of Hezbollah in Lebanon with breaking bones in Lebanon and tearing up the infrastructure and so forth? What do you think? I don't know. Well, longer term, I mean.
I would say it doesn't work. But if you tell the government in Tel Aviv or Washington that this type of behavior is not actually going to work.
It's counterproductive.
Their answer, of course, is we didn't use enough force. And in the past we failed because we didn't use enough force. If we use more force, we would succeed. I mean, the same argument is used about Vietnam. You know, we dropped 3 times more bombs on Vietnam than in Europe during World War II. But some people argue, well, if we dropped more, we could have won. So it's an argument you can't really end with.
Remember, do you remember the napalm that they dropped on children in Vietnam?
And
women?
also yellow orange.
The yellow orange is still doing it, and they got, I think, 4 million people were dead as a result of our activity there. And I noticed, it's sort of you're a historian, Caligula and things, you're a historian. I noticed for what Mr. McNamara finally said, we made a mistake. It was a national thing. We made a mistake. We killed 4 million people. That's a lot of people were killed as a result of our incursion. And I noticed no one ever went in the dock for war crimes in the case of that. Mr. Bernard, you know, Mr. What's his name? The great
Bernard
writer.
Lewis.
Not Bernard Lewis. I wasn't thinking of him. No, the famous with Whitehead, the famous philosopher. It'll come to me in a minute. Who worked with North Whitehead? Bertrand Russell had a tribunal that he tried to put together, but it never got anything. So if you're above the law, if you can win and stay on that winning curve of having the power balance in your favor, you can most do whatever you want and just say, well, we're sorry we made a mistake, but nobody goes in the dock. Only the losers go in the dock, and the winners write the history.
Of course, in Vietnam, the Vietnamese won, and here, I think what they underestimate, and this is where I think it's not just a question of short-term, long-term. If you look at long-term, there's a real serious problem in that in the Middle East, both Israel and the United States is faced really by a very strong feeling of nationalism. It's interesting when you look at the
That's
American...
what it was in Vietnam, and we call it communism. Well, what do we call it now? We call it terrorism or something.
Here, you look at the American media, the word nationalism is never used.
Really,
It's as if it doesn't exist, but in fact, the Middle East can't be understood without nationalism. There are different nationalisms. You're talking about Arab nationalism, Israeli nationalism, Iranian nationalism.
Shia nationalism?
Well, that complicates.
Sunni? Yeah, okay.
That
okay.
complicates.
I want you to help
yeah.
explain that for us if you can, but go ahead.
But as long as there's this strong nationalism, which in the Middle East is actually reinforced with religion.
Right.
You know, nationalism itself is a very potent force.
Yeah, ever since.
When you have religion put into it, it becomes doubly potent.
Like yeast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both United States and Israel faced really with a very potent dynamite. That's why they haven't been able to really solve the Palestinian issue. That's why it's going to be very hard to deal with the Lebanese issue. And in Iraq, too, even though there's sectarian divisions, Iraq itself, the Arabs in Iraq are also very nationalistic against
You think they are nationalistic? There seems to be, what's going on there now is just heartrending. I mean, that they're tearing each other apart, and there doesn't seem to be a rallying around the idea of a nationalistic rallying against, let's say, what the United States has tried to do or something.
No,
it's hard for people to understand. They're killing each other over the Shia-Sunni thing or something. It seems on the reading of things, if one doesn't understand
it's in the context of actually who is better leaders of Iraq. Is it the Sunnis or Shias? So what the U.S. is in fact playing this game of
divide and conquer?
But the problem there is that both of them are competing to see who's going to be more anti-American. And that's why it's very, for America, it's very dangerous, because so far...
Which of the collaborators is going to be seen as the most anti-American?
Yeah,
It's really Byzantine.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, it's...
We now have, in fact, extremist Sunnis and extremist Shias, both of them basically saying we are at the forefront of anti-American activities.
And then Mr. Bush is flying over there trying to say we're bringing democracy to it. It's like an absurd thing. It's like theater of the absurd, but it's so heartrendingly disastrous. It's a mess. And it's a thing that we're going to have a great deal of difficulty extricating. What do you think is going to happen there?
Well, it becomes not absurd. It's more than absurd.
It's tragic.
When Rice says this is the birth pangs of the new Middle East.
Yeah,
I mean, I think people in the Middle East literally scratch their heads and wonder where American leaders are, because here a whole continent is really being devastated.
But you said nationalism. There's this. I'm not familiar. I've only been there very peripheral, very transient, very briefly and all that. But I mean, you think the Egyptian nationalism is strong, Saudi nationalism is strong, Iraqi nationalism is strong as a thing. You've got these Kurds in the north, and then you've got this other.
Well, the
and
Kurds
it seems it's not strong enough to bring together diverse peoples in what seems there doesn't seem to be much recognition of the Iraqiness of what it is they're a part of. I mean, it's hard to understand.
The Kurds are different because the Kurds are a different nation completely. So they have their own language, history, culture, and that's where
very ancient.
That's where the nationalism there actually works against the larger Iraqi identity.
Yeah, because those things are all carved out by British colonial people after.
So it would be natural for the Kurds to have their own separate state, which they want. But you see, the Kurdish nationalism then runs counter, not just against Arab nationalism in Iraq, but is a threat to Turkish nationalism.
Absolutely. Yeah,
so there, you see, it's again nothing to do with sectarianism. It's nothing to do with Sunni Shia, because Kurds are Sunni, most Turks are Sunni. But the nationalism there puts those two nationalisms as loggerheads.
And you're an Armenian, if I understand.
Yes, there's an.
So they've had a national development. There's an Armenian Soviet.
Now there's an Armenian independent state.
Now there's an independent state and they broke away after, But Armenia's had a national identity for a long time and suffered mightily by people who did not want to recognize that, if I'm not mistaken.
So Georgians have a very strong identity. Anywhere in the Middle East you go, I think the real issue, identity, is not really Sunni, Shia. It's not even Islam as the identity. The real identity is still very much national.
And
now,
nation-
but the problem is in the Arab world,
Uh-huh.
this Arab nationalism is also basically divided into state nationalism. So Egyptian nationalism, you have Jordanian nationalism, you have Syrian nationalism, Lebanese nationalism. Those people are both Arab and also have allegiance to their state nationalism.
Okay. So that's a big theme that social scientists are interested in, the basis of what is national identity, because that's a big, I don't know, we got something, I guess, at the UN, we have something like 191 countries and probably heading for more. Kashmiris would like to be independent. How do we get at an understanding, just the social scientists, at what is this thing called? Nationalism. It's based upon language, tradition, and so forth. There is religion, there is this, but we're still wrestling with how do we define that and what is its meaning in the real world?
Well, identity and how
identity,
people identify.
Yeah, that's important stuff.
It can shift, it can change, but there is some sort of resonance. So, for instance, if you're an Arab, it depends on whether if you're in Morocco or in Libya, it doesn't really matter, Iraq, or Baghdad, what happens to another Arab directly, in a way, affects you. In the same way, if you're Jewish, you may not be an Israeli, but if you're Jewish, let's say in Brazil, you might feel strongly with what happens in Israel. Similarly, when there is a crisis, let's say in Gaza, or now in Lebanon, it's not just a Lebanese issue. When people, let's say in Morocco or Saudi Arabia, watch television.
Yes, and they're doing it.
And they see people being killed.
Babies.
They don't say, well, these are, let's say
Iraqis,
Lebanese, or these are Shiis, or these are Maronites. We don't care. Their automatic feeling is these are Arabs. We are Arabs, and that what happens there is part of us.
They are us. And that kind of a thing.
And that's the real core reason why United States has so little support throughout the Arab world. So if you go to other areas, let's say Muslim areas, like in Kurdistan, Kurds are Muslim, right? They're Sunni Muslim. You go to Albania, they're Muslims. You go to Kosovo, they're also Muslims.
Indonesia you go to.
But in the more core those areas, you find a lot of support for America. So it's not religion that determines whether they like or dislike America. It's through the prism of national interest. In those countries,
national interest. That maybe gets down to things we can understand, like land and income and money and power and these kind of things. That
how United States has supported or not supported those countries. So United States has supported Kurdistan in getting autonomy now. It supported Albania, it supported Kosovo, it supported the Muslims in Bosnia. So in those areas...
But that broke up Yugoslavia.
So in those areas, the United States is seen as supporting local nationalism. In the Arab world, the United States is seen as supporting the enemy of the Arab world, Israel. And so automatically United States is lumped with Israel.
Well, that's correct. That is what has been the case. And there would have been no Israel if it hadn't been for the ability of the United States to support them with overwhelming support right from 1948 on.
Although initially it was more European support, especially actually the first few, France was a major backer. And,
of Israel.
And Israel got its nuclear bomb from the French.
Did they really?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It's forgotten that, but actually until 1956.
What was that about? What was France doing? Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, again, it deals with nationalism. The French had a real problem in Algeria.
They had a hell of a problem in Algeria.
So in the Algerian
54,
war,
57, 58.
Because they were fighting Arabs in Algeria, they saw Israel as a natural ally of them, of France. So they supported the French.
No fooling. It was in that context.
And in 1956, remember,
that's interesting.
3 countries invaded the United Arab Republic of Egypt. The three countries were France, Britain, and Israel.
That was 56.
Yeah, 56, the
Yeah.
Suez War.
Yeah.
So they were, in fact, de facto allies.
I was there then in 57,
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
after that,
Yeah.
and got put in jail in
Yeah.
Egypt.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, but that was a story that's personal, my ignorance, going around with a camera without any sense, knowing what the hell I was doing. But anyway, it was there. But then, and then you had Abdel Nasser, and they had the pan-Arab notion. That would be that there should be uniting of the Arab nation, all of the countries, because those nations that were, those states, were imposed, as it were, by some Colonel Blimp drawing lines on a map after the First World War and the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, and so they're in a certain sense artificial. So does the Arab national feeling override the national identity of, say, Tunisian, Libyan, Egyptian, and that sort of thing, or how do we deal with that?
Well,
they all speak the same language?
Yeah, it's both.
Yeah.
Both state nationalism.
Why don't they get together?
Well,
and do something in a pan-Arab world against, let's say, Israel or the United States, if they are perceived of as an enemy?
Well, the states, the governments, have a vested interest to preserve their own states. So
they're power-based,
They're not interested in losing, basically, their own autonomy.
Didn't the British used to say divide and conquer?
Well, yeah, and also they set up many of the states.
Right.
But I think
and we inherited that.
In public sentiment, the average person in the street also feels that they have an attachment to the Arab cause. And
it's stronger at the street among the people.
Yeah.
And the leadership of the world can be a bulwark among the elites of the world in order to safeguard the interests of the elites of the world, of which they are a member part by virtue of the fact they're recognized by the other elites of the world. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that the political leadership of the world is a bulwark against what the people, in a democratic sense, really are feeling in order to keep those power relationships and the advantages that the plutocrats that run things in every country have themselves.
But it's not
Is
just
that too
the street.
simplistic?
It's not just the street, actually. You find among the very much intelligentsia, middle class, a strong also pan-Arab sentiment. So, in fact, you find quite a lot of geographical mobility among professionals. Because the language is the same. You'll find, for instance, Palestinian engineers working in North Africa or in the Gulf. Basically, it's a cultural unit. And you find even in some Arab states the right of any Arab to come to that country. So that even though the state exists, the ability of people to enter that country is sort of a guaranteed right. So here we have a strange situation. Syria is always considered in the West as highly autocratic, totalitarian, Assad. But in fact, any Arab has the right to migrate to Syria.
I noticed a lot came out of Lebanon recently with the bombing.
A lot forgotten as something like 100,000 Christian Arabs from Iraq fled Iraq for Syria.
I didn't realize.
When the United States
100,000.
So it boggles one's mind. People were voting with their feet, fleeing so-called democratic Iraq for the autocratic Syria. Why? Why? Because in Syria you could live a normal life without having your throat cut. So here again, religion isn't that important because here these are Christians fleeing. And Syria, although it's supposed to be highly autocratic, it's actually also very secular. It's more nationalistic, socialistic than religious. And therefore it's much more open to refugees for elsewhere.
Then you have let's say there's the traditional things. If you were at like a Marxist view or some sort of view, class struggle, class conflict. Some of the countries are wealthier than others, so that's a difference also. The normal economic differentiations that constitute the basis by which interests of certain groups are to be assigned is also relevant in terms of this mulligan stew that you're describing to me of the Mideastern thing. It's a very complex thing, isn't it? With
so
a lot of
what happens to the
influences.
states that have a lot of oil money, such as the
for
Saudis,
instance,
the Gulf states, you know, Qatar and so on?
Yeah, right.
If they have the money, of course, they don't want to completely lose it, share it.
Or
so,
Kuwait.
So they have a vested interest in preserving the small states. And people in North Africa, Egypt, consider actually the Gulf states, they call them pump states. Pump, because they're just pumping oil, getting the money, and of course keeping bulk of the money for themselves or investing it in America. And
Swiss
for
banks.
many Arabs, this is actually a betrayal of Arab cause.
Okay, now we're talking about that, and we've been talking about Hezbollah, and then I noticed, I think I was talking to you about Mr. Arafat in Ramallah with the 4,000 tanks that they had. They got 14,000 tanks, armored vehicles. They got conventional weapons system. Israel does, and then, but now you've got this thing where you've got a Hamas. It set me straight because I don't understand. They went and bombed Hamas was elected by the Palestinian people in the face of this awful situation that they're in. Then you got Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hamas was not able to lob a rocket into Haifa, but Hezbollah has been able to do that to a way that they've got a capability to stand up to that. And in both cases, both of those two, set me straight, they both, in a certain sense, do not recognize the right of the state of Israel to exist. At least this is part of the literature. And the president of Iran has made statements along those terms, too. Where does all that factor in? And is there a challenge to the basic premises, the raison d'etre of this whole Zionist proposition being made in sufficient amount, with sufficient capability? And is it because of that that you're saying they're going to make an attack upon Iran? Some of these things, can you understand what I'm trying to get at or understand?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Israel has cause to be worried because obviously it's surrounded by countries that are not enamored by it. So
they are deeply hatred, and that's
of course
deep.
It's 6 wars now, basically, if you include the uprisings. So there is a lot of bad feeling, and there is a visceral distrike in both sides. I mean, if you talk to an Israeli privately, you can get the feeling what they feel about Arabs. It's mutual dislike.
Yeah, but it's like the Indians on the frontier. Only good Indians are dead Indian. You know, that kind of thing where people are under the gun. And I wonder if that's been translated to American policy when we get to Iraq again, trying to whip the wogs into shape as a Western colonial attitude that has been in that part of the world for a long time.
Yeah, I talked to an American diplomat who said when he drove from Kuwait into Iraq right after the so-called liberation, he knew the war was lost the first place he stopped, because first place he stopped, he looked at the graffiti the American troops had written on the walls, and from that he knew the war was lost.
Really?
So when you have actually, I would say, countries from colonial past invading countries that have an anti-colonial past, you have these cultural clashes.
Absolutely, and much of the world has lived under the boot of colonialism, and I think people that are from the West don't understand how much that resonates in terms of their getting a sense of identity, and they just got out from under it. And the Zionist enterprise is perceived as being Ashkenazi, European colonialism coming in to take over control in the way that the Western powers had. And I don't know if that's in the conscience, but they see that as a colonizing power in the way that the zeitgeist confirmed. The British came back from the Raj. They came back. They had to be forced out of Algeria, but it came back, at least there's neo-colonial influence was there, but outright colonialism was represented in the opposite to the movement of history, with the one exception of Israel, which went counter with Israeli penetration into that part of the world, establishing Western colonial attitudes to the surrounding peoples and that kind of. Is that correct? A view that the people in that part of the region
it's not
see
only
it?
people in,
or is it too
in
simplistic?
No, it's very much true. But the way in the local populations see it is a return of imperialism.
Right.
And therefore, it's continuation of the struggle against foreigners.
Right.
But it's not limited to that, strangely enough. I think in the West, too, the perception is that they're trying to revive old empires.
Yeah, okay.
Even though officially United States will say we're not an imperial power, Israel will say we're not a colonial power. But if you sort of deconstruct...
How can they not say?
Well,
I mean, how do they say that?
Because imperialism is a dirty word.
Oh,
colonialism.
I see. Yeah.
But in fact, what you find in sort of deconstructing the
Yes,
language,
yes.
that they do often see themselves in the tradition of 19th century imperialism.
Yeah.
They, in fact,
White man's burden.
They glorify
Yeah.
19th century.
Yeah.
So you find after September 11th, actually, and even in New York Times, you get things such as we should learn lessons from the British Raj. We should learn from the Kipling.
Yes.
White man's burden.
Right.
So
right.
these were open.
Every year
these were liberals in America saying, you know, this was a good tradition.
Yeah.
So we even imported, America imported a British historian that considers the British Empire the God's gift to civilization, Ferguson.
Yeah.
He was going around the United States with CNN telling people that the U.S. should learn from British imperialism. And
Bernard Lewis, if you have to. You can go to Bernard Lewis. They only understand force, break bones.
Yeah.
That kind of thing,
And in
and that's been part of the neocon thing that's in, go on.
It is. So at first it sounds strange because you look at when the Iraqi war sort of became sort of in a quagmire, they were saying, well, this is another Indian war.
Yeah, Indian. Did they use that term?
Yeah, they actually used this.
Every year I make a point of reading 1984. Unfortunately, it's still relevant. Emmanuel Goldstein and all of that and everything. And another book I always read or try to get to is the biography of Cecil Rhodes. And the racism that was so thick is just incredible. And only good Indians are dead. And they're out on the frontier. Israel's out on the frontier, and they got this visceral hatred of the sand worms or whatever the way they see them, degrading, dehumanizing, breaking bones, that sort of thing. And then they impart that into the American attitude toward things as America begins to set up their policy in Iraq. Do you think the going into Iraq neocon influence had a strong influence on Wolfowitz, or Wolfowitz and those people were strongly influenced by the Israeli attitude toward their existential situation in that part of the world or not?
Oh, definitely.
It was. And it's perceived that way in the region.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's important.
I mean, there were, I think, other issues going in.
A lot of oil and things,
and also, I think it's besides that, I think where it merges is the Israeli perception actually fitting in with the manifest destiny perception, which people such as Bush,
Turner,
Bush, I think Rumsfeld, Cheney, they really don't I don't think fit into the Jewish perception, but they do have this, see themselves in the tradition of manifest destiny. This little sort of change in that is that the manifest destiny is the export of democracy. So they justify the occupation of
the
Iran.
World and setting up full spectrum dominance. They got military power in 130 countries with permanent bases, and they're going to say, and they're going to do it in space. And they got a consensus, the Washington consensus, that is supposed when they say the international community, they're talking about their view. And the thing that's being realized by increasing numbers of people is that their view is not adequate to what the historical development, the historical condition either perhaps allows for the masses of the people of the world in a liberating way, much less requires if we're not going to destroy ourselves. The Washington consensus that claims legitimacy historically is not adequate to what's required. Something else is required, and maybe the dynamic that's emerging now is going to challenge that assumed legitimacy of the institutions of the United States with its hyperpower capability, is asserting is there for all time. The idea of the end of history that Mr. Fukuyama said and that kind of thing is not adequate what the world requires. Maybe there's a reaction with a challenging of that, do you think, possibly, or is that again too naive?
Well, no, I think what's unrealistic about sort of recreating 19th century imperialism is that the world is very different, especially the Middle East. So the British could go into Egypt or Iraq and sort of clobber people and create a state and say, after suppressing the rebellion, they could set up their sort of puppet states. But in the 21st century, the societies are much more complex.
Got an internet now.
Internet, but it's also the opposition is much greater.
Right.
So that here we have a major superpower, United States, with spending $550 billion a year on the military. But
and $300 billion a year going to Israel that is seen by much of the world as a sort of, what is the dog that, what's the dog that's the hard dog fighter? Not a Rottweiler, but a pit bull.
Yeah.
The pit bull lapdog of the United States, Israel.
But with all that power, the U.S. hasn't been able to control just the Sunni revolt in Iraq.
Right. It's coming to cropper. They threw the dice. They made a big bet. Suppose they had won and everybody had fallen in place and they'd come up with a beautiful thing and democracy and all that kind of stuff, imposing our view on it, which may be outdated, like an ancient regime. We have a commitment to a certain idea that isn't what this future requires, as outdated as feudalism was in 1789 France. And there was a new thing coming, and we don't have a model that's relative to it. And what if that had? Then everybody they threw the dice, and there's come a cropper, and it's going to have consequences in terms of the ability for them to impose that legitimacy notion upon the world with their hyperpower possibility. Maybe the thing that's going to happen in Israel, the challenging of Israel, at the very root, is going to come back and have repercussions on the world, challenging the assumed legitimacy of Israel by its superpower status in that part of the world, and the United States. So some of the things that Mr. Ahmadinejad, and is that his name in Iran, is saying, might make more sense through that kind of a prism of historical development.
Well, I think...
Again, that's probably going too far.
Israel, its question is, Israel is, as a state, Israel is very established, and no one really can question the Israeli state. The question is Israel's power beyond its international borders.
Are you sure they can't be challenged?
I don't think that. I
don't think they can. It's forever.
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying, you know, I don't know, Iran or someone challenging United States.
Well, no, in a certain sense.
They can challenge United States power in the Gulf, but they can't challenge power.
I understand what you're saying. What I'm saying is larger than that in a certain sense, and it may be beyond the realm of possibility, because that's one of the things they want to have. It's inevitable. There's no point in questioning the Washington consensus. There's no point in questioning the United States. It is so powerful, there's no way. It's the end of history. There's no challenge to the thing in place. The assumptions of the way human society is going to be organized, it can be challenged. And it might be challenged by a world that is not served by that. It serves only the interests of the few, the plutocrats. The transitor, you got that gang in China serving the interests of gated community people. The system in place is, Russia's in tatters. They haven't got a system in place, they claim. They need some sort of a vision. It might be challenged at an intellectual level because what they're offering is not relevant to what the future requires, that it can be challenged rather than just accepted. We have to get along with this big gorilla because it's got all this power. But that may be, and it may be happening with the Hezbollah, so that you can challenge. David can challenge Goliath, and that might be something that's getting into the craw of some of the people who assumed we're the king of the world and we're going to be for the rest of the world. You just adjust to whatever we say in some sort of a way. That superpower attitude is what I'm suggesting might be in the wind.
Well, I think there's two different things. One is the challenge of the consensus and the power of Israel, United States outside its border.
And their vision.
But what the United States and Israel argues is that it's an existential challenge. This is the term that as if these powers are actually threatening the very existence of Israel and the United States. That's not in the books. There's no way any of these powers can challenge the power of Israel and United States. They can challenge the trying to imposition of American power on others or Israeli. But those states are so powerful that their existence is not challenged.
That's what the British said. That's what the court of Louis XVI thought. Well, there was something blowing in the wind that the zeitgeist required. It was called, it had a system in Europe for 800 years where people got their identity. It was an agent regime. It's forever. It can't be challenged. It was challenged.
But the challenge was challenged from within.
Well,
it wasn't challenged from, let's say, Egypt or somewhere. But
it was challenged from Scottish Enlightenment or something. It came from somewhere. It came from the United States of America. We had an idea we had made, and the system by which people got their sense of identity, the assumption of what's in place, agent regime. It's there forever, from the Roman times on or something. But that can be challenged.
But it has to come from within.
Well, within?
I don't see
the
American masses rising up against...
You don't? It might. Or the people of the world rising up against an inadequate vision for how we're going to organize things politically, economically, socially, culturally on the world. It is not. It's serving only the few, and the trends and the technological requirements are such that it has to involve everybody in a kind of liberating way to offset the possibility that the weapon systems that can wipe out the host existentially, the whole planet's challenged, and these supposed leaders do not have a vision worthy of being considered. That's what I'm trying to say. We can challenge that and not just accept that we will take whatever they give us, like some sort of peasants that they did that's what I'm trying to suggest in a sense, that I may be off the wall because everybody just assumes that this is forever and that we've got the end of history system and this is it and everybody else just adjusts to that. The world may be challenging through Israel and the United States the very premises by which supposed legitimacy is assumed by those that are so comfortably in power for a system that's not adequate to what's required. Revolution may be in the wind.
Well, I don't see the sort of movements against the United States so much as challenging as more defensive movements.
Well,
they don't have an alternative view of basically Wall Street.
Well, maybe the intellectuals of the world should come up with an alternative.
Yeah, but I don't know if those movements are going to be that enamored by intellectuals from outside either.
They usually aren't, are they? Yeah. They didn't listen to Jesus, did they? Yeah.
I think people like Chavez, or you see in South America, you see in the Middle East, what most they're wanting is basically saying this is our state, our nation.
Yeah.
We don't want America or Israel coming and taking it over.
Right.
But they don't have the ambition really or the power to really overthrow United States.
Margaret Mead said nothing is, or was it Burke, who said nothing is so powerful as the idea whose time has come. Can we agree that the national the Washington consensus and the vision that they present in terms of how the planet's going to be operating is not adequate to what's required, or not? Are we just going to muddle through with the American vision, breaking bones all over the place, breaking things down, putting military breaking this? That's it? There's no new vision that's required or anything like that? I don't think we have the luxury of just assuming that. Something new has got to come out of this because that which is in place is not adequate to what's required. We're going to destroy ourselves. Well, we're heading for a nuclear holocaust and destruction of the planet along the path that we're going.
Well, it's more, I think, environmental issue, but there I don't see a consensus. I think I see a muddling through.
The British did it for a long time, didn't they?
This concept of what's really happening, a refusal to accept really the real underlying problems.
I'm very concerned. We only got a couple minutes left. I'm sorry I've been ranting. I talk too much. I'm sorry, but I've enjoyed just ranting and get it out. But your statement that you think that there's actually things afoot to attack Iran.
Yes, I think.
In the relatively near
Yes,
term?
because I
That's
think.
very disquieting.
I think that the Iranian government is adamant in having the full nuclear cycle, not necessarily weapons, but for national prestige, their own, basically they put their own government in line.
Well, the British didn't want to let the Wogs have the Gatling gun.
Exactly.
All right? So because there are lesser people, it's an Übermenschen. The Übermenschen will stay in the kitchen, and you will do it, you will not have. We will have.
Yeah.
It's an attitude of arrogance and Übermenschen mentality that is very dangerous, and that's part of that Washington consensus, that Washington-Israeli consensus, and it may be that Mr. Ahmadinejad and Iran is standing up to that, and adequately they should be challenging it.
And that's where
maybe.
I think the main problem.
That's why they want to attack him. We shouldn't let them attack him, maybe.
Well, I think this more serious problem, I don't think we can do much here, but the real serious problem, which they underestimate in Washington, is...
world public opinion.
No, not even there. I think Iran has a trump card. It's not a threat to United States or Israel, but Iran has a trump card in Iraq.
In Iraq, yeah.
Iran has a lot of support in Iraq. There are various organizations in Iraq who are itching to rise up against the United States.
Yeah, right. And behind that, there's a lot of the world.
Well,
and the more the world recognizes the inadequacy of the vision, they don't have a vision adequate to what the future requires, is what I'm saying.
But in
the
Iraq,
so-called
it's
leaders.
not more than vision. It's a question of who has power.
Oh, okay.
And I think if there is, once there is an air attack on Iran,
what will happen?
There will be an uprising among the Shias in Iraq. And then, as it is, U.S. has enough problems in Iraq, but a Shia revolt on top of a Sunni revolt, we're basically faced with the United States then having to go in with a huge army.
And they're already spread thin.
And then it means basically reintroduction of the draft. I hate to use the word, the D word.
And you don't think that is going to get reactions in this country? And maybe they'll start rising up against the system that's being imposed upon them, and there could be a real thing happen to change things in this world?
Well, the thing is, the media can be manipulated. U.S. will present the case as if Iran attacked.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll have a Tonkin Bay type of incident.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And the public may be fooled for a while that this is a defensive war against fanatics who are out to get us. And
Emmanuel Goldstein.
Yeah. So we can really, I think we're facing really to a spreading of the crisis to a larger scale.
We'd better run the credits, and I'm sorry, and that's a prelude to the fact that we're going to have to do more programming with you in the future. You're going to have to come back and bring us up to date because we've run out of time. But really,
sorry to end on a depressing
note. No,
it
is. It's depressing. Yeah, it really is, and that's very worrying. There's no way that can be staved off. I mean, what would be the campaign to try and... That's already in the works, do you think?
I think it's, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard people say that, the bombing of Iran. We can look for the bombing of Iran.
But what they don't say is usually they leave it as that, as if that's going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
The bombing of Iran is going to just automatically lead to a much larger, basically, blow-up in Iraq.
Not only Iraq,